hype train. Let's answer some questions. Here we go. And Spiral Double Helix with a question. How to run code on your code space with GitHub. So first of all, I've never used it, but it is a newer thing that GitHub announced. Give me just a second. Let me make sure it's not going to give away my phone number. Okay, we're in. So GitHub released this thing. So if you go to github.dev, you get a VS Code-like experience in the web browser. And I appreciate you all saying that I look great. I appreciate you. Well, I know I'm not old, but like waking up with a pain in my neck, and I'm getting old. I'm getting up there. So yeah, github.dev, you get like this editor-like experience. And the question from Spiral Double Helix is how do you run any code that is on here? And I have no idea. I believe you can point this at a GitHub repo. Isn't that a thing? Go to repository. Press the period key on any repository or pull request to go directly to a VS Code environment in your browser. Okay, let's try it. So let's go to a coding garden GitHub repo. For example, let's just do the coding improv one that we did last time. Go here, press dot. So that's great. So it opens up an editor, and we want to try and run this here. So I guess it varies. Here's the thing. If I do Command-Shift-P, no, not that. Control-Shift-P, do I get a command palette? There is a run and debug. Yeah, maybe there is no way to run the code. What I was trying to do is like pull up the integrated terminal. Oh, I can edit the code. My goodness. Okay, so to run the code, you need a paid plan. Okay. So, I don't really see any way to run the code. I don't know if anyone else knows. I can look it up really quick. But yeah, people are also mentioning if you just change github.com to github.dev, you'll get this nice little editor thing. But we got a first-time chatter from Rom. Welcome in, Rom, who says, from France, short message to thank you. I'm trying to learn some dev skills with Vue. I discovered you on YouTube, and I can see some improvement on my side. Oh, thank you, and thanks for being here. We got some other first-timers in here I didn't acknowledge. Let's say hi to you all. We got Yee Star, welcome, and Marvelous, and Mystical Tempest, and Raj, and 24 Ghost, and Misty is a punk rocker. Welcome in, Misty. And Liquid, and Shadow Fox, and The Net, and Reggiebug, and Coco Alex. Welcome, and Sumac. Welcome in, everyone. Appreciate you being here. If your first chat was a command, it actually doesn't show up there. I should probably fix that, but yeah. Yeah, so there's a note in the run and debug window explaining that it wouldn't work. Let's see what happens. So click this. Clone repository locally and open on desktop. Create. Oh, GitHub code spaces is different, right? So GitHub code spaces, they might have a free plan. I'm going to hide my screen again in case anything weird pops up. But with GitHub code spaces, I think you can run your code because a code space gives you a container. Okay. So let's see what we get. So now, yeah, so this is different. So you can see over here, I'm on the dev domain. The dev domain is read-only. Dev domain lets you just look at the files. Yeah, so the same thing happened with mine. I had to allow pop-ups to get the thing going. So yeah, this is read-only. But if you go in and then go into a code space, you could definitely run your code here. So check it out. this is a front end app. Like it's there's no node.js code to run, but I can't read that at all. I need to go into episode 15. Go into Netflix Heist. And then do I have npm? I do. So I can do npx light server. So this is just like a static file server. And that will start it up in that folder. And so essentially, once you have it in a code space, you can do anything you could do on a Linux computer. Because this little terminal right here is to a remote Linux computer that they have spun up just for me. Cool. So in the chat, well, does anybody remember what the commands are for this thing? Move the Christmas tree. Oh, what? I mean, you don't have to see the commands I'm running. Really just the fact that this is a terminal and you can do whatever you want. Balloon up. Is that what it was? Wait. Where's our command handler? Yes. Yes. Okay. So there we go. So in the chat, do ! balloon followed by up, down, left, or right. And that changes the velocity of the balloon. Yeah, so somebody set it to a standstill. And so last time I got really tired towards the end. Our collision detection is kind of broken. Go up. But essentially, if the balloon intercepts with one of these Netflix original titles, it disappears. That's it. We built this last time. Cool. Yeah, got some supports. Sour Dev with the Prime, thank you, and Bort Milk with the Prime as well. So yeah, we figured that out. Essentially, github.dev is a read-only thing, and then but if you spin up a code space, you can actually run code. Yeah, so it's not possible to run the code on github.dev, but on code spaces it is. And I don't know about code spaces, so I do have GitHub Premium or whatever it's called. Like I pay a certain amount a month to get a little badge next to my GitHub name. And I don't know if that's what gives me access to code spaces or how many code spaces you get. But if you have access to code spaces, that's how you're going to be able to run the code. So like, I mean, as another example, here, let me. Oh, true. Yeah. Sorry, it's not read only, but you can't run the code. But yeah, what Alka said is technically you can edit the code. And I think like if you save it, this will actually create a commit to the Git repo, which I don't want to do, but it's also possible to just make changes to your GitHub repos directly here. Yeah. So code spaces lets you run code, and you can basically run any code that will run on a Linux server. Because you see this little terminal right here? I'm in a Linux server. So yeah. Yeah, let's do it. We'll do lshw. Not found. What's a command I can run to figure out what kind of system this is? I mean, they probably tell us. It's a Docker container of some kind. GitHub Pro, that's what it's called. Did I type the wrong thing? Here we go. Cat proc CPU info. Is that 4 cores? Okay, so it's obviously running on a big server, and that big server probably has like a 32 core Xeon or something like that. And then our little machine. Wait, do I get 6 cores? How many cores have they allocated for me? Wait. Okay, processor 0. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I get 4 cores. They gave me 4 cores on this thing. And it's running Ubuntu. That's amazing. I don't know. And it's not a virtual machine. It is a Docker container. And yeah, every instance of a code space, I believe, gets its own Docker container. Yeah. Crazy. Okay, how do I like stop this container so that I don't like use up my quota or whatever it is? You know what? We should probably just look into it. GitHub code spaces. Okay, blazing fast cloud developer environment. All right. Faster than your laptop. Oh, and apparently you can choose. You can choose your instance size. Great. Pay as you go. So, for a 2-core, it's 18 cents an hour. Cool. How do I get access to code spaces? It can be enabled in settings. Cool. Cool. I mean, I guess they charge by the hour? Am I being charged by the hour right now? I guess maybe because I have GitHub Pro, it has my credit card on file. Yeah, so the server in this terminal is just a completely remote machine. Think of this as SSH. So basically, I'm SSH'd into a remote Docker container, and so whenever I started up an app, it mapped the port that thing was running on to a specific domain. So if I do it again, so if I do npx light server, you'll see a little pop-up. So it says like it detected that there was activity on a port, and then it gives you a domain that's like port forwarded and tied to that port. Yeah, so now this specific domain is serving up requests on port 3000 that are running on this remote Linux machine. Let's see. Can anybody go to this URL? Apparently you have to be logged in with my credentials to even be able to load this URL, which is nice. Is it like a screen share in Zoom? Not quite. So this is actually VS Code running inside of a web browser. So it's not just a screen cap. It is check it out. Let's open the DevTools. We can do this. The keyboard shortcut is can I right? Yeah, and then it taps into my right click. But we can do this. We can. How do we? Web developer tools. Okay, check it out. That is a span. So this is literally a web page that is VS Code. And so if you're not familiar with it, VS Code actually is it's the Monaco editor. That's the one. Because VS Code is an Electron app, right? Or did they start their own thing? Regardless, VS Code is running inside of a Chromium browser. And so that's what this is, but it's running on this web page at this URL. And then this is probably using like WebSockets or something like that. So it's communicating over the network, translating that into SSH to be able to communicate with this remote server. So yeah, that was fun. After stream, I'll need to figure out how do I turn this thing off. Like, is it no longer in usage because I... okay, stop current code space. Cool. And so, I mean, I was running that for what, 10 minutes at most? So it's going to charge me a fraction of a penny, which is cool. Okay. Thank you for the question. Spiral double helix. That was fun to learn about, though. There are other services that offer a similar thing. So Code Sandbox is another one. So yeah, the answer to your question is on github.dev, it is not possible. It is possible if you open it in a code space, but a code space costs money. So it's not possible to do it for free on there. However, if you check out Code Sandbox, this will let you run front-end apps and it provides an editor. It's a very similar experience, but you can get started on this for completely for free. There are other services. One to check out for like backend stuff is Glitch. So on Glitch, you can create a little project. There's like an in-browser editor. They give you terminal access very similarly, but you can actually run backend applications. I believe with Code Sandbox, it's mainly just front-end applications that are like running a Webpack dev server or something like that. So yeah. Oh, and thank you, Nookie Poo, for the for the posture check. So there's that. There's Code Sandbox. Cool. Thank you for the question. Yeah, you can still edit code for free. So the github.dev thing, completely free. You can edit and then make commits to your repo. It's just glitch.com. Glitch.com will get you there. Yeah. Cool. So let's answer some more questions. If you have asked a question and you're here, type !mark here in the chat, and those questions will bump up. They're in order of when they were asked. Cool. This question from Red Crystal. Hi, CJ. That's my name, by the way. If you didn't know, my name is CJ. Is there a way to sort a nested object by multiple conditions? I'm struggling to do so and cannot find the answers online. First, in the array, I need to have all the elements with classification negative, then all the elements with classification positive, and lastly, all elements with classification neutral. Once that sort is done, I need to sort each group by weight. Okay. Is there a way to sort a nested object by multiple conditions? Yeah. So this, I mean, I don't want to do your coding challenge for you. I'll come up with a similar one that's not the exact problem. But yes, it is possible to do with the JavaScript, and you do it with a sorting function. Yeah. Okay, let's do it. Let's write some code, and we can better describe what they're asking here. Sorting complex objects. What's happening? What's happening? My terminal just froze. Where's my keyboard messing up? Weird. Okay. So I'm not going to write a sorting algorithm. I'm going to use the built-in sort, but what I'll show you is you can provide a sort comparison function, and that comparison function can do the kind of sorting that you're expecting here. Data equals this. There we go. Okay, so for example, we have this data object, which is unfortunate because it's not an array, so we kind of need to turn it into an array first. However, imagine this were an array, and we have each of these objects in that array, and we want to sort it according to their rules, which was the array should have all of the negatives, then the positives, then the neutrals, right? So if we were to do this manually, like negative is there, great. And then this one's negative, so it would need to be moved up. And this one's negative, so it would need to be moved up. And then after that, we would put all of the positives and then all of the neutrals. So that's the kind of sorting that we're doing. Now, sorry. It's tricky because like this is an object. We would need to turn it into an array first, and then by turning it into an array, we potentially lose the property here. And so when you say sort a nested object, do you want to change the order of the properties? Is that what you're trying to do? Because changing the order of the properties, I don't know if it's consistent across JavaScript engines. Because like, so for example, I believe if I were to log this object out, it might actually log the properties in alphabetical order. Let's see. And then we'll just run this code. Yeah, it doesn't do it in alphabetical order. But we would, to put them in order, we'd have to create a new object. Yeah, so I mean, if we turn this into an array, we can put it in any order we want. But specifically, it being an object makes it weird or a little bit tricky. So, Red Crystal, help me out here. Is it an object? Can we turn it into an array? What say you? Have I tried Tabby Terminal from Basavir? Never heard of it. A terminal for the modern age. Never heard of it. It reminds me of Hyper. So Hyper was another terminal that got released. Okay, so Red Crystal says it's an object. We can turn it into an array. I just need to present it. All right, so first of all, let's get this thing into an array, because then we can use the built-in sort method to sort based on your conditions. So it was already mentioned in the chat, but object.entries is the method you want here to maintain all of the property names and their values. So if we do object.entries with data, my blue screen is messing up. If I do that, oh, that's bad. Oh, I mean, it's as good as this is going to get. Okay, so this is going to create an array of arrays. So it's going to create an array, and then each value in that array is going to be an array that has the first value in the array being a string with the property name and the second value being the object. So check it out. If we do this, yeah, and then Nukipu is mentioning if we want to turn it back into an object, we could do from entries. So yeah, if we log this one out, you'll see we get an array of arrays. So now if we do this, it's similar, but now we get an array. So you see the square brackets, but each value inside of it is an array that has the property name and then the object. Okay, and so in our case, we're sorting by the one of the properties inside of the object. So for that, we can use the sort method. The sort method takes in a comparison function. And this is what you can do. So basically, behind the scenes, this is going to do some sort of optimized sort. It depends on the JavaScript engine that you're in terms of what sorting algorithm it's actually going to use. But for pretty much any sorting algorithm, you need to compare the things in the array. So in this case, this is giving us a function. Well, we're giving it a function that gets two values. It's going to get two of the entries in the array so that it can compare them. And if A is greater than B, we should return 1. So that means in sort order, A should come after B, if we're doing from like least to greatest. So if A is greater than B, so if A, not greater than, if A should come after B in sorted order, return 1. If A should come before B in sorted order, return -1. If A and B are the same, Return 0. Yeah. So Red Crystal says they understand it. So basically, we can use any code we want right here to figure out if A comes after B. And in your specific situation, negative is always first, then positive, then neutral. So you could kind of just write that logic out. There might be like a really optimized way to do it, but you could say like if and so this is where it gets tricky because now it's an array of arrays. So A is technically like the key. We'll call this the A key and the A value. And then we get here the B key and the B value. Because remember, we did object.entries, which turned it into these arrays. And so this is going to be A key, and this is A value, and this is B key, and this is B value. Yeah. So this is destructuring, which is going to pull those two out, and then we can use them. So I can say if A value dot classification is equal to negative, it should come before it. So we'll just return -1. And then if B value classification is negative, then A should come after it because A wasn't negative. And then we could do a similar thing. So if A value dot classification is positive, so we want negative then positive. So if A is positive, honestly, I'm just trying to avoid writing a bunch of logic because you could do this with a bunch of logic. Basically, you need to do something like that. So if A is negative and B value is not negative, absolutely return -1. If A is negative, we'll do it like this, just so it's a little more readable. So if A is negative and B is not negative, A is going to come before B in the sort order, so -1. If A is negative and the B value, I mean, we don't even need to look at that. So, and then we can go on to the next one. So if A is positive and B is neutral, then A comes before B as well. And then if the B value is positive and the A value is neutral, then A value should come after. And then if they're both neutral, it's 0. Am I missing anything? I don't know. Let's just return 0 here. Let's see what happens. Let's see what sort order we get. So this is going to run. It's going to sort them. It sorts them in place. It sorts them in place, but it sorts in place of this value here. So we do want to store the return value. So we'll call it sorted data. And then let's see what we get. So we get negative, 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 positive, positive, neutral, neutral, neutral. Great. And it's now sorted by negative to, so negatives are first, then positives, then neutrals. We could try doing the object.from entries, and that'll give us back an object that now is in the right order, right? So we have negative, 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 positive, positive, neutral, 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 right? There might be some redundancy in my logic here. I'm not going to try to optimize this. And then the other thing you could do is, now that we're sorting by classification, we could do a further sort by weight. And so we could do something like this. If both of the classifications are equal to each other, I don't want to make it small. I don't want to make it smaller. So if the A value weight is equal to the B value weight, not weight, classification. So if the A value, so if they have the same classification, now we're going to decide to sort based on their weight property. And when you're sorting by numbers, it's a whole lot easier because you can just do some maths. You can just return A value dot weight minus B value dot weight. Let me make sure I have that right. So if A value weight is 1900 and B value weight is 1450, we subtract them. That's going to be a positive value, which means A comes after B. So a positive value would be the same thing as 1. But if A is less than B, it's going to be a negative value, which means A comes before. We want the reverse. We want the reverse because we want to return 1 if it's less than. Cool. So now, so you can see right now it's sorted by classification. We got negative, 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 positive, positive, neutral, neutral, neutral. But within that, if we look at all the negatives, this has a weight of 1950. So we would expect it to come first, then this weight, then this weight. So with this new sort, let's see what we get. Yeah. So now we're not only sorting by classification, we're sorting by weight as well. So it becomes negative, but with the biggest weight, negative, a little bit less, and then we can see within each subgroup. So with the positives, those are ordered correctly by weight, and within the neutrals, those are ordered correctly by weight. Yeah. Yeah, people want me to optimize this. I don't think I want to. I'll leave that as an exercise for Red Crystal. So basically, you could make this code shorter. Yes, Red Crystal. You can go in here and figure out a better way to write this so that it's maybe 3 or 4 lines of code instead of 3 times 9-ish lines of code. Cool. Cool. All right, and because you're working on this, I'm not going to give you the code. You have to come up with it yourself, or rewind the stream. But use what I taught you to figure it out yourself. I believe in you, and at the end of the stream, I will push the code up so you can look at it. I just don't want to be doing your homework for you, you know. Shouldn't I short circuit the equality check first? That's actually a good thing to point out. So if they're equal to each other, we just return 0. So what AcidSpark is mentioning is you can reduce the amount of compute cycles or the amount of logic that's running if you just do that first. So if the classification is the same for both of them, just return 0. Don't even bother doing the rest of the code below it. So yeah, that's a good optimization as a short circuit there. Hey, what's up, Stony Eagle? Yeah, thanks for being here. I already know it isn't negative. I don't know. But like I said, I'm going to stop here. But Sherix has a potentially different solution. Turn negative, neutral, and positive into an array and use index of and sort by index. Possibly. Though I think that would technically be a little bit more complex than this in terms of like how much code has to actually run to get it working. Yeah. Cool. And thank you, ambiguously cryptic. Now reverse a binary tree. And Spiral Double Helix is reminding you all to sub with Prime if you have it. I don't normally do that, but I appreciate your Spiral Double Helix. I answered their question earlier, so they're trying to get me money. But yeah, click that link, see if you have a Prime sub available. What's up, Benny? Welcome in. Yeah, many generations. Yeah, no worries, no worries. So simplify, just compare a value.classification with b value.classification. Is that what I'm doing? I don't know. And Val is asking, do you submit your code to verify code quality on something like SonarQube or similar? I don't, but I've heard of like static analysis tools. I've never heard of SonarQube, but I'm sure it's one of those things. Code quality and code security. Yeah, so there are tools you can run that look at your source code to potentially identify bugs, security issues in the actual source code. So like, what's up, Colloquial Al? Rar. Now, don't apologize. I appreciate your how you entered the room. And thank you, Chewy Dinosaur, for that Prime sub. Yeah, and so basically, this doesn't look at your compiled code or the running code. This looks at the actual source code and looks for common issues and then like points them out to you. And there are other tools that do similar thing. I don't use it regularly. Every now and then at work, if we have like a security audit, we'll pick a tool and run it against our code, but I don't use it regularly. Not the string, but the characters in index 3. Oh, we're getting meta about, I mean, we're getting code golf with it. Because if you look at 0, 1, 2, 3, so we have A compared with I, 0 compared with T. That's some code golf logic. Because then we're just comparing. We're yeah, so A comes first, then I, and then T. So it's always going to be negative, positive, neutral. I'm not gonna change the code to be that. But for those of you that code golf, you get what they're saying, and that's ridiculous. It turns into a one-liner. All right, next question. All right, if you've asked a question, type exclamation mark here, and it'll bubble up. Yeah, this emote, exactly. That's how we're feeling with that code golf. Use an object lookup to convert positive, negative. Oh, that's even better. I like that. This is less code golfy and more like makes the code easier to read. I like this, Alka. You basically map negative, positive, and neutral to a number, and then you can just do math with it. Yeah, that's. I am going to show the code that way because that's a little less code golfy and makes sense. Yeah, so check it out. We'll call it a value map, and we'll say negative is -1 because it should come first. Positive is 0 and neutral is 1. Actually, I mean, it could literally be any number because we're just going to do maths with it. Code golfing is when you take a solution and you make it as small as possible, which is what we're kind of about to do. So basically, all of that code can get turned into this. Oh. And actually, our short circuit needs to be updated. We got to change all of our code. We got to change all of our code. Because our short circuit should actually be this. So if the classifications are the same, then compare the weight. Otherwise, we just return the a value dot classification from the value map. So this will convert negative, positive, or neutral into a number according to this map here. So if it's negative, it's going to be 0. If it's positive, it's going to be 1. If it's neutral, it's going to be 2. And then we just subtract that from the value map at b value dot classification. And so if a is negative, which is 0, and B is positive, which is 1. 0 minus 1 is -1, which means A comes before. So yeah, all of that code gets just turned into that, and it should work. Ah! What happened? Did I do the wrong thing? Oh yeah, that. Cool. It still works. It still works. So we've essentially code golfed this. We've taken all that code, turned it into smaller code. We could also remove white space if we wanted to get even smaller. Okay, but I am done talking about it because this always happens. I say I'm done. I don't care about optimizing it. And then people are like, well, you could do this. You could do that. And then I get carried away. Okay, if you asked a question, type exclamation mark here, and it'll bubble up. Thank you, Alka. Thank you. Thank you for the clap. Yeah, now it's easier to copy for homework because it's only one line. Kulfan is saying, I'm not using A key and B key. You're totally right. But with my destructuring, I still have to destruct. If I want to use destructuring, I still have to destructure it. Like, these two are unused, but I mean, technically, we could. So, if the classifications are the same, we sort by weight. We could also say if the weights are the same, we sort by key. That we could get even more. Yeah. So we'll do this. If A key does not equal B key, then we sort by weight. Otherwise, we sort alphabetically. And then you would have to have the logic here. And you can't, to sort alphabetically, you would have to do a full-on comparison. See, I'm off again. Sort by key instead. That's what I'll leave you with. Okay, another question. SourDev has a question who says, what is the difference between useMemo and useCallback and when to use each? So this is a question that's specific to React. I think we've talked about it before, but let's do it. I have a memo example. Okay, Past CJ, what do you got for us? Yeah, I memoized some Pokemons with this. Yeah, but we also showed that a useMemo is just a use effect with a state variable. Cool. We'll do it from scratch. I mean, will we though? Yeah, we will. Will we? No, we're not. I'm gonna walk through this example. Nazgul is asking, is it possible to get into async stuff? You can ask a question. Ask the question here. If you have a specific like async or promise question, I can try to get into it. Otherwise, we could do an impromptu lesson on asynchronous JavaScript. The only thing is these days when I come up with an impromptu lesson, I just talk forever because I can't ever figure the right balance of background knowledge versus what the exact topic is. I don't know, but let's look at this example. I'll go ahead and start this up, and we'll talk about useMemo and why you would use it, and then we'll compare that to useCallback. UX Web, you say that? We spent an hour and a half trying to get web Bluetooth working, and we never got it working. So it was like an entire stream wasted. Not necessarily wasted. I mean, we learned that Firefox has issues with web Bluetooth, is what we learned. But it was pretty frustrating in the moment. Okay, so this is our app. Basically, when the app loads for the first time, my blue screen is messing up again. That's better. When the app first loads, we make an API request to the Pokemon API to get a list of all 151 Pokemon. Oh, no. We get all like close to 900 Pokemon. All right, let's take a quick stretch though. Whew. So if you haven't been keeping up with Pokemon, there are a lot of them. So if we look at this page, Look at this. 898 says Auntie. There are a lot of Pokemon. So when this page loads, it makes a request for all of them. I don't know what this, let's see what this is about, or this placeholder. Typing here will cause the render function to run again. Okay. But so the page loads, we make a request for all of those Pokemon. And now let's say I want to filter that list. And now I want to only see the Pokemon that has the name Pika in them. You can see it paused for a second. I think we actually demonstrated debouncing. And so debouncing, that's another topic that we can show, is so when you're typing here, instead of immediately filtering the list, we wait until the user is done typing for a certain number of seconds, and then we filter the list. So that prevents us from having to filter the list 4 times with each letter press. So yeah, but my green screen keeps getting like a weird shadow. I just have to stay still. But the memoize aspect of this is anytime I filter by something that I've already filtered by before. Well, actually, not quite. So let me collect my thoughts, and then I'll give you a really good explanation of this. Okay. When I type the word in Pika, and when we're ready to actually filter, we need to filter through an array of length 900. So we need to look at 900 individual items to see, does the name match Pika? No. Does the name match Pika? No. Does the name match Pika? No. So we have to look at 900 of them to figure out that only this many match the name Pika. Okay? So that's step 1. Now, in React, when other things on the page update, don't move. When other things on the page update, our render function reruns, meaning it creates a new virtual DOM tree to then compare against the DOM to decide what to update, right? So specifically where useMemo comes in handy is if we have other state updates happening on the page, we don't want to have to recalculate that filter every time anything else on the page updates. So right here, if I type here, causes a state update. Because behind the scenes, it's updating a state variable. But you'll notice that it doesn't have to recalculate the filtered value. That's basically what a memo is. Yeah, it's similar to computed, but in React, you specifically do it to prevent calculations during a re-render, because React is going to re-render. Like that, if anything true is true, React will re-render a lot. React renders a lot. The render function runs a ton. And so you don't want that filter of 900 items running on every single render. And you can see, like on each letter press here, this number is going up. So we are rendering. But the list here of the filter items does not have to recalculate. So that's why we're using memo. If we change the filter here, it does have to recalculate. So if I do Pika C, you'll see that it has to check against 900 different items. Does the name match Pika C? And then finally we get the resulting list here. But any other state updates don't have to rerun that filter. So React gonna react. Exactly. So that's the point of useMemo. And to actually see that code in action here, I will show it to you right here. So if we look at our render function, we have this state variable called filtered Pokemon. And whenever we render, we have to iterate over that array to create a list item for every single Pokemon. Great. This input is the one where we can do the filtering for the list. So anytime we type into it, we are updating a state variable behind the scenes, but we aren't updating the filtered Pokemon array until like after 2 seconds. So that's the debounce aspect. You actually don't even need to worry about that. But that just sets this filter here to be what is in the input value. And then after 1 second, if the user hasn't been typing anymore, that's when we actually do the filter. So that's when we look at that array of 900 items. We check to see, does the name match the Pokemon that they typed in? And if it does, that's going to result in the array, and that gets set on the filtered Pokemon's state variable. It will re-render, and that will show us the filtered Pokemon on the page. Though, I guess... Yeah, I'm redeclaring a variable here. I have to get rid of this debounce is the thing. I have to get rid of the debounce. And then I have to get rid of that to really show you the useMemo. All right, let's make sure this works. Oh, well, filtered string should match against anything. I can do this. If there was no filter, just return the Pokemon's as is. I still need this use effect. Okay, we're back. Great, we're back. Okay, so the page loads. It makes the API request. That gets set in a state variable called Pokemons. So this is holding all our 900 or so Pokemon. So that gets set. Great. Now, whenever the filter changes, we need to recalculate that list of filtered Pokemon. So if I search for char. Yeah, and you can see because I removed that debounce, it stutters because it has to filter the array on every single letterpress, but debouncing is a separate issue. Okay, but it's done that. But because of this useMemo, that calculated filtered value is stored in this variable filtered Pokemon. And so that's what's being used right here. So when this state update happens on the other input, like this memoized value does not have to recalculate because I used useMemo right here. That's it. That's what useMemo is for. So useMemo is specifically for values that you want to use in the render. useCallback is for functions that you want to use in the render. So useCallback is another thing you can bring in from React. And specifically is for functions. And there are a couple of places where I could use it here. And the scenario is these two. So like we talked about, React renders a lot. So this console log render function is running. You can see that it's already ran 6 times as I typed the word hello world. It's ran 12 times. So that render function runs when state changes. And this, if we look at this right here, what is this? Someone in chat tell me, what are we looking at right there? What is that thing? And Lasev asks what we're building. We're just talking about it's code. We're talking about use effect and use callback. Okay, I see one answer. I see Pablo's answer, which is close to what I'm expecting you to say this thing is. There it is. There it is. Kosa Corion has it. It's a function declaration. Like we are defining a function right here. Yes, it's an arrow function. It is a function, but we are declaring a function, which means this function is getting put into memory somewhere, right? And like I already said, React renders a lot. So that means on every single render, we are creating a brand new function behind the scenes, right? Right? It's a function declaration. I mean, it's the same thing as saying like const set filter callback is equal to this, right? We do this, and then we pass in this value here. But the one takeaway I want you to have from this is that we are defining a function. Like that function has to exist, and this is the code we use to define the function. Meaning, on every single render, that function gets redefined every single time. Now, JavaScript is a garbage collected language, so on the next render, it's going to see that, oh, that function isn't referenced anymore, so it'll get garbage collected, the memory will get freed up, but it is taking up some memory. Now, that's where useCallback comes into play, because what you can do is instead of just defining this function directly, you can pass it into useCallback. And just like useMemo, it basically is going to create a value for you that only updates if it's dependency update. So what I've done here is I say this, so this function doesn't depend on any state variables, right? It's not using filtered Pokemons or filter value or anything like that. It has no dependencies. So I'm saying use callback with this and define no dependencies. And basically what this does is it puts this function into a state variable behind the scenes. So on subsequent renders, when it renders again, it does not redeclare it. It uses the one that was initially declared. So now if we do this, the app should behave exactly the same. Pikachu. Right. So we're there. This specifically is the callback we were messing with, the one that sets filter. And then if I do this, it renders, but it doesn't have to recalculate. So effectively, the code is the same. However, instead of redeclaring that function on every single render, we have now stored that function behind the scenes, and it's going to reuse that function on subsequent renders. Now, if your function did use any sort of like state variable, you would have to put it as a dependency, and if those state values or props ever changed, this callback would get recreated. But this is the use case for use callback. Now, I told you all of that. For simple callbacks like this, don't use it. People have done. Actually, I'll leave the code there so you can see the example of it. But people have done performance analysis to see like is it actually more performant to basically put it in a state variable behind the scenes so that it doesn't get recreated on render. And what they found is for most cases, this just redeclaring the function on every render is actually more performant than attempting to put it into a use callback. So that's what you would use callback for. I would say like if your specific callback is doing anything that costly. So if it's doing anything similar to like filtering an array, I don't know why you would do that in a callback, or other things. So basically, if your callback function is more complex than just calling some other function, then you should decide to put it in use callback. So yeah. And Shrew is saying, why does it have to redefine the function on every render, even when you declare it as a const outside of render? So technically, we are in what's called a functional component, meaning this isn't a class component. There is no render method. This is the render method. So even though it's a const right here, this entire function is the render function, and it gets rerun, so it is getting redeclared. Now, technically, actually, and I could not put this outside of app. Let's take a quick stretch. Yeah, this whole function executes every time. Basically, I'm being a really good teacher and like telling you how React works. But if you're a smart student, you'll realize that this is dumb. Like, why would you even use React if it does all this? No, I'm just kidding. But if I wanted to declare this outside the scope of the function, I couldn't because it needs access to set filter, and set filter is only accessible inside of the function. Yeah. So, yeah. No. I joke because I really like Vue.js, and it doesn't have you jump through all of these hoops. There's no reason to have a use callback in Vue because things are just cached automatically. They don't get created on every re-render. In Vue.js, the render functions are smart. So instead of rerunning an entire component's render function, Vue will do optimistic updates of like only the one specific area of the UI that changed. It doesn't need to recalculate the entire DOM for the entire render function. It also has what are called computed properties, which are, in my experience, much easier for beginners to grasp than even this useMemo thing, because useMemo deals with, it's a higher order function. It takes a function as an argument. It's a little weird here. In Vue, you just created a computed property. A computed property is basically this. Like, your computed property would just return this, but in your template, you would just reference the computed property's name. And in Vue, you don't have to specify a dependency array. In Vue, it automatically figures out what your dependencies are based on the code in your computed property. But I was just joking. I shouldn't be so negative about React because, I mean, I use it on a daily basis. But honestly, though, talking all of these things out really hits home why I don't like React. But to the original question from SourDev, the difference between useMemo and useCallback. In short, useMemo is for complex values that you don't want to recalculate on every render. So useMemo, use it for that. useCallback is for callbacks that potentially have complex logic in them that you don't want to redefine on every single render. So that's when you should use one over the other. Great. Did anybody learn anything? Type 1 in chat if you learned something. Yeah. Does a React class do the same thing? What is ability saying? The whole function executes every time. So a React class is different because it separates, you separate your function, or like your methods, your function definitions from your render. So in a React class, specifically the render method is going to get run as often as it's getting run here. However, if you've defined, like if we have a method called on input change or on filter change, that wouldn't get recreated if it was defined as a method because it's on the class instance. It would basically just get created once when the component was created instead of on every single render. So that's one difference. And it absolutely will get created. Like you can't really share the prototype method in a React class component because it needs the this value of the instance. So you have to create a new version of the method that's bound to the instance, and that's creating a copy. Or you define it as an instance property that is an arrow function, but still that has to get defined for every single instance of that component. So I would say using class components will prevent you from, and if you don't do this, if you don't embed the arrow function here, if you define it as a method or a property and then reference it here, it's not going to get recreated on every render. But I don't know how much of an improvement that would get over there. Yeah, you're welcome, SourDev. Yeah. Stony Eagle says, we're all entitled to our opinion, even you, CJ. Thanks. Yeah. Alka says, React is all over my head. I appreciate you. Some people learned. Some people are just hanging out. Yeah. Undefined. Great. What's up, Jilliter? useMemo for values, useCallback for functions. That's a summary. Yes, with the caveat that you really should only use them if they are things that are complex calculations that you don't want running or being created on every single render. That. Thanks for the hydrates and the stretch. Alistar is saying, I've been working on a nice, happy alternative to React and Vue for 2 years. Just need to get my smart DOM populator to play nice with. That's pretty cool. I mean, it's going to be hard to compete because like Svelte is really good. And once it gets popular enough and people start adopting it, I think Svelte is going to be the thing because it is. How do I say this? I like the way you write the code. The way the code is written is similar to how you would write it with Vue, and it's simple. And then at the end of the day, it doesn't even use a virtual DOM, so you don't even have to worry about like weird re-renders and stuff like that. It's not true, Afro Horseman. We're just answering the questions that came in first. Yeah. I'm Flippo is saying they actually talked about this in React Conf 21. Something they're researching, they're calling React Forgot, which could eliminate the need to use Memo. That's nice, but honestly, it should have existed already. Like, I mean, here's the thing. At the end of the day, you may not even see that much of a difference with useMemo, depending on the app that you're building, depending on like what's going on here. Because at the end of the day, most of your users have 8 gigabytes of RAM and have a really fast processor, so they're not going to notice if the app stutters slightly because it has to do more re-rendering. For most cases, obviously there are people in places that don't have fast internet and don't have fast computers. I guess fast internet doesn't necessarily matter in this scenario, but that's when you would need these kind of optimizations. But I don't know. Yeah. What's up, Chevywood? Thanks for being here. I don't like React, and here I am learning. Well, you're becoming more informed. So at work, when they're like, "Should we use React or Vue?" and you'll be like, let me tell you something. Let me tell you why we shouldn't use React. Is there a drawback to using useMemo on simple calculations? I don't know. You'd have to look. Was it who's the guy? The guy that teaches React. I believe he did an article on it. How often do I distro hop? I don't. I mean, I'm on a Mac right now, so I used to a lot. Back in my college days, I was figuring out which Linux distribution I liked. I honestly just settled on Ubuntu because it required a whole lot less configuration and worked on most machines. Yeah. I'm still confused about all these, React, Vue, and Svelte. Thank God I'm living in this era. Yeah. Trying SvelteKit. Cool. I haven't tried SvelteKit. We probably should do that at some point. Remember when developers had to consider computing resources like a precious essence? Yeah, I do. That's it. Rendefan got it. He's the one. Kinsey Dots. I'm pretty sure he wrote an article on the performance of useCallback, and why in most scenarios you shouldn't. Yeah, Kinsey Dots. There he is. Thank you for that. Dodds. Yeah, Dodds, not Dots. But you got it. Oh, and thank you, Pranjal. Thanks for being here. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like getting an old used Mac is another good way to just build for iPhone or iOS if you need to do that. You don't need like the latest and greatest. You can just use it as a build machine. Yeah, well, thank you, Fabricio, and we'll see you next time. Arch. Wish I didn't have to. OS X emulation is too much effort. Yeah, I tried emulating it in VirtualBox a while back, and it just runs really slow. They really don't like it. It really doesn't play nice. And lots of supports I didn't get to call out. I apologize. Bortmilk with the 2 months. Pablo with the 50 bits says it's Friday. Stony with the 4 months. Chewy Dinosaur with the Prime. Blank with the 10 months. Murdoch with the 20 months. Hope all is well. Hope to be around more soon, but off to work I go. No worries, Murdoch. Thanks for dropping in. And Alistar with the Prime. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, what we're going to say? Here we go. Basically, you can ignore everything I've been saying for the past 30 minutes and just read this article, which will only take you 13 minutes to read. But yeah, check out this article. Kent C. Dodds talks about when to use one or the other, and I do believe he goes into detail of like why you shouldn't use it for like simple scenarios. Okay. I'm not gonna go into this because I've talked about it before. So Nookie Poo asks, why do I use Vue over React? I'll say in general, like in not talking in specific terms. I like to do things in the fewest steps possible, right? Like, and thank you for the bits, Nikki. I'm a developer. I like shortcuts. Like even in my daily life, I'm always looking for optimized routes, right? And Vue lets me get things done in the smallest number of steps possible. The fewest steps possible, exactly. Whereas in React, there are a lot of steps. There are a lot of things to remember. And there's a lot of extra code you have to write to get the same things done. Overall, that's like my general reason why I like Vue over React. There's a whole lot more to it than just that. I'm not just a lazy developer. Like Vue does a lot of things that are smart and make sense. But I'll point you to this because I've talked about it a lot on stream before. There's links to 2 different streams. I did an overview of Vue.js. So if you're a React developer, I introduce you to Vue from a React perspective and talk about all the things you would do in React and how you would do it in Vue. And then this other one, I think I actually broke down a bunch of points as in like why I choose Vue over React. So check that out. Pretty much every time I talk about it, it starts a holy war. I try not to mention it because, as you can see, I use React and I know how to use React. Yeah. Cool. All right, I like this question from DevM. What's an example of dependency injection? I don't think we've done an example of, like I wanna write one from scratch. Right? We're gonna do dependency injection from scratch. Okay, so first of all, let's just look up the term dependency injection. Here we go. In software engineering, dependency injection is a technique in which an object receives other objects that it depends on, called dependencies. Typically, the receiving object is called a client, and the past injected object is called a service. So this concept is really popular in AngularJS. It's really popular in C#. Any Java people out there? Is dependency injection popular in Java? I don't know. It's like the jelly inside the donut. Java Spring does dependency injection? Cool. Okay. And what's up, Scoots? Yeah, thanks for dropping in. Okay, so people are telling me, so this is pretty common. I would say in other places in JavaScript, it's not as common. Like really just in the AngularJS world. In terms of JavaScript is where it's popular. And then, yeah, so Nest.js, which is a backend framework. It's very similar to Angular, also very similar to like enterprise-y Java kind of stuff. They do dependency injection as well. So let's break it down. I'm going to try to make a little code example. Oh, I spelled it wrong. What do I do? Use the move command. Injection. Can you share a link on this? Feel free. Yeah, just make sure it's appropriate. But yeah, you can share links in here. Is it like SQL injection? No, in that it is a good thing. Like dependency injection is intended. It's a feature. As developers, we like it because it lets us do certain things with our code. Whereas SQL injection is bad. You don't want your code to be vulnerable to SQL injection. Can anyone tell me what the YouTube link is? We're not doing this. No, I'm going to create my own example. My own example. I'm gonna try to like, who can think of a good example of it? Like, I remember using it and doing it in the days of Angular 1. So if we look at like Angular 1 code, which is Angular JS, right? Angular is Angular 2+. Angular JS is the old one from back in the day. Let me look at their example on dependency injection. Yeah, so understanding hierarchical injectors, yeah. So XHR, there it is, and dependency injection. Let's see if we can see an example. Yeah, so here is an example in somewhat understandable. We'll walk through this. We'll try to understand this code. And then I'm going to create my own example. So what this code is doing is it is defining a component called phone list. I gotta stop moving. Okay. So it's defining a component called phone list within a module called phone list. So you can think of a module as like a larger container for things. And within a module, you can put components, you can put services, etc. So we're defining a component called phone list. In the old days of AngularJS, you would define where did your template come from, and then you define your controller function. So your controller function has all of the logic of the component. Now, where is dependency injection happening? Right here. So we define this controller called phone list controller, and this is the controller for the specific component. And we declare a dependency on $HTTP. And all we've done is say, all we're saying is this function takes in $HTTP as an argument. Hey, now we still use Angular. Well, I feel sorry for you. Actually, I don't. I mean, if you're doing AngularJS the right way, it's totally fine. It's like Vue.js, but if you're putting everything on root scope and just doing it the wrong way, it can definitely be a pain. Okay, so the dependency injection in action is right here. We've said, I have a dependency on $HTTP, and then later on, when this code needs to run, Angular will inject that dependency. So $HTTP, you can think of, it's like Axios, it's like Fetch. It's a way of making HTTP requests. And this is all the code that would be required for this. As you can see, there's no import of $HTTP. There's nowhere in our code where we are actually directly calling this function. It gets called for us. And because we have this defined as a parameter to the function, Angular will automatically inject that dependency. How does it do that? Let's see it in action. So let's say I have a function called getPokemon, and I declare a dependency on HTTP. I mean, yeah, this is fine. I'm actually just going to inject fetch, so I should be able to just do this. So it's fetch, yeah, like this. We'll make the call, and then we'll return response.json. Like this. I need the Pokemon URL. Let's just grab that from that code we were looking at earlier. Where were we? Memo. Thank you. I appreciate you all. Cool. So, well, get rid of that. Get rid of that. Okay, so we have this function, getPokemon. It has declared a dependency on $HTTP. It's going to use that dependency to actually make the HTTP request and then get back some result. Okay. Behind the scenes, how, as a framework, could we inject $HTTP? Well, check this out. If we toString the function, we literally get a stringified version of that function. So behind the scenes in a framework like Angular, that's probably what they're doing. I think if we just log it, I don't know what other properties we get access to. So it is a function. If I do length, that is going to say 1 because it takes in 1 argument. Does anyone else know? Is there any other way for me to figure out what the arguments are to this function without doing a toString? I think this is it, right? ToSource? Not a function. We could Google it, but I'm pretty sure this is how it works. So I am not on either coast. I'm like I'm in Mountain Time Zone. Give me 1 second. There's a possibility that I might actually get this Pokemon thing that I've been trying to buy since October. It might work. It might actually work. I have to do this. Oh no. Oh no, I only have 1% battery too? Rush. Speedrun checkout. No, the site is swamped because everyone else is trying to get this exact same thing. Ugh. The thing is, this is the one of the last Pokemon. I mean, if you know anything about Pokemon, you'll know what product I'm talking about. This is one of the last Pokemon products that is selling for more than twice MSRP. And for those of you not in the US, MSRP is manufacturer suggested retail price. If you're elsewhere in the world, I think they call it RRP, regular retail price. Battery life? No, I didn't charge my phone last night. Oh, yeah, the site's down. And it's out of stock. All right, we tried. Okay, so we're going to implement dependency injection. So let's say somewhere in my code, this get Pokemon function is going to get called. Actually, I mean, let's just call it my controller. And this is the data. And then let's say my controller just returns an object with my data. Actually, let's call this my... What should I call this? Thank you, Doc. Thanks for chiming in. Hopefully you're doing all right. I mean, I'm pretty sure this is how at least AngularJS gets the injected dependencies. I don't know if there's any other way. Naming things is always hard, but because here's what I want to do. Yeah, we'll call it the controller. It's fine. We're gonna make this kind of look like Angular. So basically, this controller will return an object. We can like use that object in a view or something like that. And then let's say I say CJS. That's what we're gonna call this. Is the CJ framework. We'll say add component. It's gonna have a view and a controller. I probably don't have to implement this much, but we're going to do it anyways because it'll be fun. CJJ, no, just CJS. So we have that, and then we'll also have a view function. So view will get access to, let's say, the model or like, yeah, our model, and it's just going to return some HTML. We'll just have a list, and then we'll have a list item for every single Pokemon. I'm going to copy my code from React just to get the what the template should look like. .results. So this will be Pokemon is data.results. And then our template is simple. Okay. Yeah, something like this. Okay. We're gonna get there. Just give me a second to write this out, and then we'll actually talk about dependency injection. So model.pokemon.map. For each Pokemon, we want this little string here. Great. Okay, so I'm not using any framework. There's no React here. There's no Vue here. This is just plain old JavaScript that works in the web browser. I have a function called view, which is just going to be a list of all the Pokemon names. I have a controller which makes an HTTP request, and then sets the data. Oh yeah, you're right. And then we should join on the empty string. Yeah, like this. Cool. Yes, I do need to await this. Great. But let's say this magical CJS thing exists. We want to add this component, and then we'll do something like init, and that will fire everything off, add the component to the page, do all the logic and stuff like that. The main thing we're getting at is how in the heck is this thing going to get access to $HTTP? Because it's not defined in anywhere here, and that means behind the scenes in this CJS framework, it needs to inject that dependency. Okay, let's define CJS. This specifically, so CJS is an object. It has two functions, add component and init. So I'm just going to do this. It's an object. It has add component, and it has init. Yeah, it's good to hear, Alistair. So dependency injection, that's what this is. We're getting there. We're kind of far away from it. I don't know why am I writing all this code? It's going to be fun. Isn't it? It's gonna be fun. So let's think through this. So when we call add component, actually, we're making a framework that can only have one component at a time. So we say set component, and then actually, that's all we need. Honestly, that's all we need, because we say set component, and then it should just show up on the page. Yeah, so in our case, or if we're getting other terms out there, CJS is technically a singleton because there's only one instance of it to use here. So yeah, okay, so set component takes in the component. A component has two properties, right? It has the view and the controller. We need an element, so I'm just going to define that as, well, it's just going to be document.body. We're just going to replace or set the HTML of the body. So we'll say the model, and we need to make this an async function. So the model is going to be component dot controller, and we need to await that. So when we set the component, we're going to call this controller function, right? Remember that it still needs $HTTP. We haven't handled that yet. But it's going to call this. It's going to wait for it. It'll get back the data, and then it's going to call view. So we'll just call this the HTML. So this will be component.view with that model. And then we'll just say document.body.innerHTML is equal to that HTML. Okay, super simple. That's all it's going to do. But this needs $HTTP, right? So right here, it's taking in $HTTP. Where is $HTTP? We have to figure out that it even needs that. And so that's here where we're going to do the dependency injection thing and figure out the how we actually pass that thing in and know that it actually needs that. Okay, if we run this right now, I need to create an HTML page. Got to name it the right thing. And then I need to add those scripts. So we'll add a script for our CJS library. And then we'll add a script for our index.js, which is all of our application code. Cool. And then actually, let's do it like this. Instead of putting it on the body, we're going to put it on app. So grab the element with the ID of app and set its inner HTML to be the HTML of the view. Okay, why is this complaining? That, great. Okay, so if we run this, we're just going to get an error. $HTTP is not defined because when it attempts to call our controller, it's not passing in anything, and it can't invoke undefined because right now it's not getting $HTTP. It needs $HTTP. So if I just run this with a static file server, if we look in the console, $HTTP is not a function. Okay, how do we get it? With dependency and framework, dependency injection, also abbreviated as DI. So if you ever see DI, that they're talking about dependency injection. So this is not a framework. This is just JavaScript. This is just what's supported directly in the browser. We're attempting to kind of very naively implement what a framework might be doing with dependency injection. So how do we do the DI? I want something like get arguments. Well, something like, so we want to get the args, and we do that by passing in the controller function. And then if we have the arguments, we can then pass them into the controller. So this is where the magic happens right here in get arguments. So I'll write a function, get arguments. It takes in some function. And then we do what we were talking about earlier, and we'll probably use like a regular expression or something like that. So we'll have the string version of the function, which is function.toString. So that gets the stringified version. And then right now we could write a simple regular expression to pull it out. In the real world, you would have a full test suite that could make sure that it could get the arguments out of anything. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to match this. I'm going to match against this to pull out the list of arguments. So let's do string function dot match. We'll do a regular expression. We just want the first occurrence of function followed by 0 or more of anything, followed by a parenthesis, followed by 0 or more of anything, followed by a parenthesis. And we specifically want this group, so we're going to match that group. I think that's all we want. I could do this using the Shadow Realm ES proposal, which lets you evaluate code within a custom environment with globals, kind of like the Node VM. See, that would great. Like in other programming languages, instead of two-stringing a function or a method, there are built-in ways of getting like metadata or attributes about that function, so you can figure out what are the named arguments that are passed into it, which is a much more reliable way of doing this. I'm going to do it the naive way. Just know that do this better in the real world. But let's see what this gives us back. We could look at the reflect API, yeah. So check this out. So we did the match, and because I wrote a regular expression that's matching in between these parentheses, it gives me back $HTTP, which is pretty cool. So we could do something like this: the arg string, or really this is the parameter string. I sometimes confuse the two terms, but technically, parameters is the term you use for a function definition or declaration. So when you define the function, they are parameters. When you invoke the function, they are arguments. A lot of people use those interchangeably. Yeah. What's up, Trash Dev? Yeah, so on the function signature, they are parameters. Right? What if it has a function in a string? This will match the first occurrence. So because it matches the first occurrence, we should be good here. We could look into the reflect API. I'll figure this out and then we'll look into the reflect API. Okay, so the args here would probably be the param string split on commas. And then for each of those, we want to trim it so that it doesn't have any white space before or after it. This is going to be group 1. So at this point, we should have an array that just has $HTTP in it, and we do. So now we need some way of mapping the dependencies that people are requesting to something real. And we could allow them to do it. We could, but in this case, I'm just going to have a variable that says something like my dependencies. And that's just an object. And if someone requests the dependency $HTTP, I'm just going to give them back fetch. And so fetch is a global variable that, yeah, it's a thing. So let's do this. Now that we have this, this args array, we could map over it to get the actual dependency. So what? Yeah. So we're going to return args.map. That's going to give us each arg. We want to map that arg to our dependencies. And so that's going to give us back that specific one. And so that's going to give us the function reference fetch, right? Yeah, all this code is going to be on a repo called AMA, or Ask Me Anything, on my GitHub. But yeah, you can take a look at it. But like I said, don't use this. Use the general idea, but code it better. But at this point, we're done. At this point, it's just going to work. Are you ready? Are you ready? I'm going to go back, and it's just going to work because at this point, we got the args, we passed in fetch, it made the HTTP request, and there's just going to be a bunch of Pokemon on the page. There are just a bunch of Pokemon on the page. Yeah, first try. Look at that. Well, so But the main idea here was dependency injection. Yeah, still above my head. That's okay. I'm gonna use it in production, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. Well, yeah. Well, let's take a step back and talk about like what just happened. So, first of all, I have defined my little controller here, and I say, hey, my controller needs $HTTP. I need it. So here I have defined my dependency. Like I've defined what I need. And then I'm using this framework. I pass in my view and my controller, and now it's the framework's job to give me the things that I need to inject those dependencies. And that's what will happen when it actually tries to run it. So I call set component. We have the controller in the view. But in order to invoke that controller function as a framework, I need to figure out what are the injected dependencies. Original equals function, function equals function, console log arguments. I guess that could work. Like I said, there are better ways of doing it. Ultimately, this function is magic. Just get the arguments somehow. But so to call that controller function as a framework, I need to pass in $HTTP. So I first figure out what are the dependencies that this, in this case, this component or this controller has declared. I figure that out somehow, some way, somehow. And then I map those dependencies to an actual thing. One thing I could do, though, is I could throw an error if the dependency doesn't exist. So let's just do this. We're going to iterate over the array of args. And if any of them are undefined, throw an error and just like stop the app. So if the dependency that they wanted is not defined, I'm just gonna throw a new exception or a new error. Unknown dependency. In this case, do I get access to it? I guess I don't. I lost the dependency name. So I can do something like this. Like I said, there are better ways to do it. I'm just trying to get this thing working as a demo. So I could say unknown dependency. Args at I of 0. Otherwise, I need to get all of the right-hand values. So I could do like object dot from entries. And then object dot values. Something like this. Thank you, args.length. Okay, it still works. Just ignore all my messy code. But let's say I also want a dependency on $banana. Now I'm going to get an error. Unknown dependency $banana. So readable. So if someone is using my framework and then they see this error, they're like, oh, well, I have to register that dependency. And then you can get into the idea of like, well, not only does the framework provide dependencies, you now provide a way of the people using your framework to add dependencies. So we could do something like cjs dot add dependency. So it's going to add a dependency for $banana. Dependency. And that's just going to be a string with a banana in it. Cool. Or not add, we could do like register dependency. And then now over in my framework, I need to handle register dependency. So it has a name and a value. Well, that's actually really easy because I can just put it into this object. So now I can say dependencies at name equals value. So now, if any other component wanted to use the $banana dependency, as long as it was registered ahead of time, now it can automatically get injected. And then right here, I has banana. That cool. So now when that controller requested the $banana dependency, it got it because it was a registered dependency. I feel like I talked about that for too long, and there's a bunch of questions that I'm not going to be able to get to today, but this was fun. So in summary, dependency injection is a software pattern where you as a library or framework user can declare that you want specific dependencies to use in your functions or your classes or your methods. You basically just put them right here. Or the framework might have some other way of declaring dependencies, like maybe you call a function to say it's declaring, like it's defining its dependencies. Some way, somehow, as a framework user, you say, I need these dependencies. And then when the framework is running your code, it determines where you need those dependencies, and then it automatically injects them, or in this case, it calls a function with them. But this is the injection part right here. We're injecting those dependencies into the thing that declared that it had a dependency on it. And then typically frameworks will have a way of registering your own dependencies. So you can define services or other things that you might need to use throughout your code base, register as a dependency, and now anywhere else in your code base, you can declare a dependency on it and get it into your code. So that's dependency injection. This is an extremely hacky way of doing it. Don't do this. Like, use a framework that's already doing it, or write a bunch of tests and handle all the use cases. I really just wanted to show how we could inject that thing, which we have. That's it. That's all. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts? And thank you to DevM for asking this, because I don't know if it was DevM, but somebody asked this question a while back and we never got to show like an example of it. So yeah. And Ray is saying, so in this case, if you declare the dependency name on a controller, then it will insert it. Yes, that's the dependency injection example we have here. If I have a controller and I put something in the arguments, the framework will attempt to inject it. That is dependency injection. And you might be wondering, like, well, what's the alternative? What do we do instead of dependency injection? You just import it in. So like in the node, yeah. So why and when would you use DI? Really, if you have an extremely large, not extremely large, if you have a larger code base and you don't want to have to manually import things everywhere you need them, dependency injection makes it so that it's a bit easier to get things that you need where you need them. Whereas if you think about node.js without dependency injection, if I wanted $HTTP, I would just import it from some place. and then I can use it. And then I don't define it as a dependency here. I just use it. Similar thing with banana, right? I import it from some place. And then my controller doesn't need to define it as a parameter. It can just use it because it was imported here. So this is the alternative, which is what we do in the Node.js world and React and Vue and everywhere else. But it can really come in handy if you have stuff that's used everywhere. So typically, like in the Angular world, you're injecting custom services. So you have a custom service that does the job of making HTTP requests to the Pokemon API, or different things like that. So I've never actually used inject and provide in Vue, but it probably does that. Yeah. How do you do that with async storage? Yeah, so I mean that's the thing that I glossed over here is I defined an async controller, and then my framework just handles async controllers by awaiting them. it will get a bit more complex if the registration of a dependency or the requirement of a dependency is async, and it's not async in all cases. But yeah, that just gets more complex. Yeah, and so that's another aspect of dependency injection. Why people do it is it makes for easier testing. So because I wrote my code like this, and because my framework automatically injects the dependencies, the code works, right? Well, what if I want to test this code? Now, like instead of using the framework directly, the framework would provide some sort of adapter, and it would allow me to register like mock dependencies. And so when this code runs later on in a test, instead of getting the real $HTTP, I could get a mocked version to get a consistent test input. And then my tests are a bit easier to write because I don't have to like override imports or do anything weird like that, or like create a mock value and then automatically call the function myself. Behind the scenes, I can inject mocked values when this is running in a test environment. So that's probably another, like one of the major use cases of dependency injection, as well as for testing. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking about this. Thanks for asking. Hopefully that was useful for someone. Let's go on to another question. I think Afro Horseman is the person that's been asking me to answer their question, isn't it? Because we're here. We're finally here. If that's the case. Are you here, Afro Horseman? So Google dependency injection. Something really cool just happened. What happened? I don't know what you mean. Yeah, that's another good point. UX Web is if for whatever reason later down the line you need to no longer use fetch. Like let's say you don't want to use this anymore. You could register a different dependency, and then all of your other code remains the same as long as the new dependency you've registered has the same API. So it has the same methods that can be called and stuff like that. But yeah, that is a good point. So like, let's say now I want to use Axios everywhere. I'd have to create a wrapper because Axios doesn't work exactly like fetch. Like there are methods on it that I would need to call. But yeah, that is a way of potentially changing your dependencies, but the rest of your code doesn't have to change because you're using dependency injection. You don't have to change the imports everywhere. I tried. Yeah, and so in the object-oriented programming world, you would use an interface, and as long as your new implementation matches that interface, it could still be injected, but you're getting the new implementation injected. Yeah. How do you do use effect without Redux? Do you mean without React? What do you mean? What do you mean? Okay, we're going to answer this question from Afro Horseman. Here it is. I'm trying to decide on a backend for a React app. Express is so unopinionated that I feel I'm going 1,000 directions. Do you have a recommendation for something opinionated that's simple to learn? So Nookie Poo is suggesting Adonis.js. There's a few others. Yeah, so I'll give you recommendations, and I'll give you multiple ones that I know of that you could try. And then I'll tell you what I prefer to use. So yeah, Fastify is one of them. However, if you look at this person's question, Express is so unopinionated. Fastify is similar to Express in my experience, right? Like, it's really unopinionated in like how you set up your routes. It's similar to Express. Like every route you want to define, you create a little handler and then you register it. This is not very opinionated, right? So, and I'll talk about that. What does unopinionated mean? Because I'll show you some other examples. Like someone suggested Koa. No worries. I think it's good to point out, not the camping, because if let's talk about what unopinionated means. Because if we look at Koa, this is another way of creating backend applications and request handlers. It's similar to Express. Like you have essentially your request handlers. It changes a little bit how you register those request handlers. So this does .use. Trying to get rid of that shadow. And Koa is nice because your handlers can be async and like await things before going on to your middlewares and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's fairly unopinionated. It's just another way of registering routes that's maybe a little bit nicer than Express. That's another one. Is Happy.js still a thing? Of course it is. So Happy.js is from Walmart Labs. And it's another alternative to Express. So you create a server. What's nice is or at least I think, like for beginners, I think this is nice how you register your routes, because you specify the method, you specify the path, and then you have the handler. It's a bit more explicit than like Express. But again, all of these three that I mentioned are not opinionated. Basically, they provide very simple building blocks, and then it's up to you to decide how you organize your files and how you organize your routes and how you organize your middlewares. All of that is up to you. So you get to make all of those decisions with these kinds of frameworks. And for a lot of projects, that's not good because the more opinions and the more decisions that you as a developer have to have, the more time is spent doing that versus actually writing code and solving problems. So yeah, these are examples of unopinionated frameworks. So I'm going to show some examples of opinionated ones and show how they differ. Yeah. And lol, Magain, you got this. The thing about coding is it is frustrating. Like, coding and learning to code and all that, you're going to be frustrated. I think one of the first mental shifts or changes you have to make is acceptance. Accept the fact that you are going to be frustrated. Like, stop trying to fight the frustration. Like, it is frustrating to run into problems. It's frustrating when things don't work, but if you're feeling like you shouldn't be frustrated and then you are frustrated, you're going to be even more frustrated. So first of all, accept the fact that you're going to be frustrated. And then I suggest figuring out some way of measuring your progress, right? Measuring when things actually do go well. Because right now you're lost in the headaches, you're lost in the frustration. So anytime you actually are doing good things, or you are learning, or you are progressing, you may not see that, and then you don't get the little dopamine kick from realizing that, yeah, you actually are making progress. It's tough. So that's my advice. I don't know if that's motivating. All I'm telling you to do is shift your mental perspective. Like, you're gonna get frustrated, and accept that, but measure your progress and see that even though you are getting frustrated, you're still making progress. You'll still get there. Okay, Afro Horseman is the person that asked this question, and they're saying, ultimately, I want to build a backend, but I don't have enough backend experience to make all the decisions of how to organize and connect everything. Sure. That makes sense. Oh yeah, Loopback is another one. Is Loopback opinionated? Yeah, React is another example of an unopinionated framework. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome, Lol. Can we get some hearts in chat for Lol Magain? They got this. They get the key performance indicators, KPIs. Is that what that is, Killer? No, I'm not from a business perspective. I'm talking about like personal. Like, how are you doing better? What are your goals? You don't have to make it so formal, but yeah, KPIs are a thing. Schema validation with magical TypeScript typings is pretty neat and Fastify. Oh, I didn't know they had that. Yeah. Yeah, they're the hearts. Great. Okay. Is it loopback.io? A highly extensible Node and TypeScript framework for building APIs and microservices. Let's look at the docs. Getting started. So this is not, I mean, anytime a library or framework has a CLI tool that asks you questions, that means it is potentially a little bit more opinionated because, like, as far as I know, actually, I don't know anything about Fastify, but with Express, there is one officially sanctioned generator, but it doesn't ask you very many questions, and after it generates, you never use that tool again. I imagine it's similar with these two. Whereas a lot of times frameworks that have a CLI tool like this will let you use that CLI tool later on, and then you can like run a command that automatically generates a controller file or a model file or something like that. So yeah, we've got the controller, some annotations for the path and the method. Let's see. Let's look at a hello world. I want to see a more complex app. To-do list, maybe? Or all of the route? Yeah, okay. So they have a controllers folder, a data sources folder, a models folder. I don't know if these folders are required or automatically picked up by Loopback. Anybody here use Loopback? Can they tell us? Like, is this a standard when you create a Loopback app? Do you create these folders, or can you create whatever you want? So we have our application. We have our static path. Oh yeah, okay. So you can probably name them whatever you want, but what's nice here is whenever you boot it up, you're saying, my controllers are all defined in the controllers directory with this extension. So look in that folder, automatically register all of those controllers. So this is an example of a bit more opinion, though it is flexible because you technically could name the directory anything and name the files anything as long as you configured it that way. But it is automatically going to go in here and then just register all of these controllers for you. You don't have to manually write the code to do that. So anytime you want a new one, you just add it to the folder. It's going to automatically get registered. And I'm sure they have a similar way of doing it for like data sources and stuff like that. So that has a bit more opinion. So yeah, Loopback might be an option. One I'm going to point you to is Feathers.js, which is what I like to use. I'll say this has some opinions, but overall, it is fairly unopinionated. I mean, it has some opinions and it'll get you set up and there's lots of helpers. But at the end of the day, if you want to make customizations and you want to do the low-level things that you're used to doing without Feathers, you can do that as well. So like, I think Feathers is a nice, happy middle ground. And the other benefit you get is it also includes real time. So you can create APIs that are accessible over WebSockets. So Feathers.js is cool. You can see an example of, so I define an app and then it has this concept of services. So instead of model views and controllers and like routes and stuff like that, it has a concept of a service. So a service has a name and that service will be mapped to that specific URL at that name. And then a service can have various methods, like a get method or a remove method or an update method. And then by default, if you're using one of their data providers, you actually don't have to write any code for those specific methods. So for example, if I'm, at least what I would use, I use the Feathers objection adapter. So what you can do with the Feathers objection adapter, I really don't like that my blue screen is. Feathers does not use dependency injection. But what you can do with this adapter is say, I want a new service called Notes, and it should look at the Notes database table. And now you have a complete CRUD API against that table. It automatically has the methods for create, read, update, delete, list. There's also like filtering and searching. You don't have to write any of that code unless you want a more custom version of one of those methods. And then you can also define like your own services and stuff like that. So that's why I like Feathers. You can check it out. But it is more opinionated in that it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you in most cases. That's where its opinions come into play. However, because it is just a JavaScript app and it is it's just JavaScript. There's no magic. So you can, and it does have a CLI tool. It'll generate the app, but you can put the files anywhere you want. As long as you update the code to have the right imports, you can have any structure that you want as well. I don't think Vite is opinionated because it uses project generators. So you get that project generation and then you can just do whatever you want from there. So on the spectrum of extremely opinionated versus not opinionated at all, I would say Feathers is like right in the middle. So that's Feathers. Some other ones to look at are Sales.js. Now I haven't actually ever used Sales.js in a project, but I've seen it. I know it does have its issues. Like if you look at their GitHub repo, I mean, they do have 22,000 stars, but they have 500 open issues and 60 open pull requests. So there could be issues with it, but I think for like basic use cases, it's probably fine. And the thing about Sales is it was inspired by Rails. So if you've ever used Ruby on Rails, you know that it is extremely opinionated. Ruby on Rails says, put your controllers in this specific folder, put your views in this specific folder. If you do this or that, you do it in this one specific way, and then it just all works. As long as you know all of the rules and opinions, your app will just work and you write a lot less code. So Sales is very similar. And they have like a CLI tool. So to generate it, you can say what kind of app you want. I believe Sales uses behind the scenes Waterline.js, which is an ORM for talking to databases. And this looks really nice. I haven't used this. I know you can use Waterline outside of a Sales application. But what's interesting is you can write code that's database agnostic. Like the code you write isn't specific to Postgres or MySQL or even MongoDB. But then you have an adapter that will let you use that code against a given database. So you actually, if you wanted to, you could swap out from a Postgres database to a MongoDB database with no code changes, which is pretty crazy. I mean, probably a few code changes to like change the adapter that you're using and stuff like that, but it basically maps all of it for you. I do want to find an example of just like concepts and app structure. Let's look at app structure because that'll show you what I'm talking about. So this is what every single Sales app is going to look like. It's going to have an API folder. That API folder is going to have a controllers folder. It's going to have a models folder, a policies folder. It's going to have every single app you look at that was built with Sales is going to look this way. It's going to have a config folder with these. And essentially, you start just putting your files into place, and everything just starts working. So that is an extremely opinionated framework. Like it has an opinion on how you do everything, but as long as you do it that way and you know all of the rules, it's going to work pretty nicely. So Sales is like extremely opinionated. And then did somebody mention another one? Next.js. Yeah. So Next.js is a way of doing like a React app. However, if you're wanting to build APIs, those are just route handlers. It doesn't really have a lot of opinions there. Yeah. So from the PHP world, if you've done Laravel, Sales is very similar to that, which is also very similar to Rails. Like it's interesting that in the JavaScript and node.js world, like the tools like this aren't as popular, at least from what I've seen. I'm getting really mad at my blue screen. It keeps getting shadow. Yeah, so these aren't as popular in the Node.js and JavaScript world. Like we use lower level tools like Express, and every project is done slightly differently, and everyone has opinions, and they're not using an opinionated framework. Next.js is opinionated for React. So if you're doing React-y things, like the library React, if you're doing React things and you're using Next.js, it has opinions about where you put some of the files and how you do some of the things in React. If you're building APIs with Next.js, it's just request handlers. It doesn't have many opinions around that. Yeah, and the Nest.js is extremely opinionated. Just like AngularJS is extremely opinionated, or Angular is extremely opinionated. So this is another one. It's a lot. For a beginner, I wouldn't recommend it, because it is a lot. It's a lot. But it's a similar thing where it has a specific structure that it wants you to follow. As long as you put your stuff there, it'll just work. Does anyone know of any other JavaScript stuff? Oh, I guess Adonis was mentioned. I've never used it. Whoa now. A fully featured web framework for Node. I haven't used it. I don't know what its opinions are. Svelte and Sapper. Yeah, I would compare that to Next.js, because I don't think. Well, I mean, I gotta be careful with what I'm searching the web. I gotta be. Yeah, so this has opinions about how you do Svelte stuff, like create views and components and stuff like that. But if you're doing API routes, I don't know if it has opinions on that. Like server routes. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's just like very similar to using Express at that point. Yeah, and then Remix is another one like that. They had oh no, that's not it. A recent release that came out. So this is supposed to be similar to Next.js. I don't know if they have anything for building API. Let's look at API routes. Routes are their own API. Consider this route as a loader. Call loaders outside of navigation. Okay, like if you're doing like React, server-side rendered React stuff, this could help with that. I guess this whole time I've been mainly thinking about building a specific standalone API, an API that does not do any sort of rendering or anything like that. All right, so we have a request handler. We define our routes. We have a controller. And look at this. Can anyone tell me what this is? Probably. I think it is. What is this? We talked about it today. It's dependency injection. Yeah, or is it? It looks like dependency injection. It looks like dependency injection to me. So basically you have like a route handler. You define a dependency on this HTTP context, and then you get that injected. Though at the same time, it may not be an injected dependency because it's different for every single request. So I don't know. It looks kind of like dependency injection. So yeah, Adonis.js looks fine. I don't know if it's as opinionated as something like Sails, but yeah. Okay, so those are my suggestions to you, Afro Horseman. I would say Feathers is a nice middle ground, but if you want a ton of opinions, Sails, and then maybe check out Adonis because I haven't looked at it. If you feel like jumping into the deep end with a lot of opinions, you can check out Nest.js as well. So hopefully that was helpful. I'm going to answer 2 more questions and then I got to go. Who has the best question? If you've asked a question, type ! Here. It'll bubble up. What about Vue? Vue is a front-end framework. So similar to how I was saying, Next.js has more opinions for the React side of things, but not the API side of things. Nuxt.js would be the same thing for Vue. It has a lot of opinions on how you do the Vue stuff, but it doesn't have any opinions on how you would build the API routes, which is more so what we're looking for. Oh, Prisma's another one too. Yeah, there's a lot of other ones. There definitely is. Okay, we'll answer this. So this is more of like a conceptual question. So Veritatas is asking, what do you do as a front-end dev if the back-end lacks behind? Really, this is just like a teamwork question, right? Because like you're working on a team and someone on your team that you are depending on, like you can't move on unless that person finishes their job. That's a thing. What do you do? You mock. Yeah, that's a good first step. So basically, make sure that so in this example of front end talking to back end, if the back end team already knows what their interface is going to look like, if they already know what method what endpoints they're going to be creating, that kind of thing, you can mock it out. So basically, you can write code that makes a fake request to a backend to a server that responds with a similar response as to what your backend eventually will be responding with in the real world. Some simple tools for that, like if you're already writing tests for this front end, you could have mocks in your tests that mock the HTTP responses. But I'll say one thing you could do is spin up something like this. So JSON server is a simple little tool. You just run in your command line JSON server and then pass in the path to a JSON file. And then that just gives you an HTTP server that lets you make requests against this JSON file. Now, like, you should never use something like this in production, but if your backend is following a similar API, you could make calls against this to get some mocked out data. So that's a more technical thing that you can do to solve this problem, is just mock it out. Basically, write your code as if they had already finished, and ideally, when they finish, they adhere to the same contract, they have the right endpoints, and you change the URL and it just starts working. Sadly, in the real world, that's not always the case. It's not often the case. Can I use that with Log4j? This is just installed globally with Node. You basically install it globally and then just run it like as an executable. I don't think it has anything to do with Java. But a lot of times the backend team might not know what their endpoints are going to look like, or they might change slightly because of a technical issue. And so then you'll have to go back on the front end and update your code as well. So that's a tricky situation. I think if it's a small team, if you're a small team and the backend could potentially use help, and you know some backend, you could offer to help. I think also as a learning and growing developer, you could potentially ask to sit in. So if you have nothing else to do and it's a small team and you're potentially close with them, you might just ask, hey, can I sit in and watch what you're doing? I want to learn a bit more about the backend and get a better idea of what you all are doing. And so that's a good use of your time, like especially from the company perspective as well, because you're learning and growing, and eventually you might even do some of the backend work as well. So that's some other stuff. There might be some, yeah. So that's the one. Another scenario is you just wait. You grab some popcorn, you Netflix and chill. Yeah. Another option is you just do it yourself, but like cowboying it is a term that's used. Like you go rogue and just like do someone else's work. It's not always the best scenario, because often this is a team issue, right? And if you do it once, you're going to have to do it every single time after that, likely. And you're not making a better team. You're basically just saying like, fine, I can do this without you all. which might be fine the first time, but then people might, like your bosses, like, oh, you can do everything? Let's fire everyone. Now you get to do all the work. You don't want to do that. And also, you don't want to make them feel bad because they can't get it done. There's probably technical reasons. I missed a bunch of chats. I don't know if anybody said anything related. Let's see. Space. Oh, you're welcome, Scoots. Thanks for hanging out. Yeah, and so this is what I mentioned earlier is like, yeah, you could mock it, but the backend team might have to change how they expected it to be, and then you have to change your code, which is unfortunate. Oh, yeah, I think that's a good thing to point out. So GitSum is saying, in my job, the front-end team does the API design, and then the back-end team has to implement it. Is this orthodox? I think it varies. Like, I've been on teams where this is basically just a very nice back-end team. I want to come up with a better word. A very... and also maybe the backend team doesn't have as many opinions. Because I've worked in scenarios where I was only doing front-end dev, and I was working with the backend devs, and I was like, hey, I know you created these endpoints, but it would make it a lot easier on my end if you created these 2 extra endpoints, or maybe one of these endpoints. Can you do that? And they're like, yeah, sure. I'll throw an argument into the request so you can like filter it out and it'll make it easier for you, or I'll just add another request. They were happy to do that. I've never had a scenario where the front end team says, these are the specific endpoints that we need. Now back end team go do it. But I don't see that as bad necessarily. I think the one scenario, or some scenarios where it can be bad, are if the backend team is just doing it without asking questions, and then you end up with a really convoluted and bad backend architecture because you're trying to solve all the problems of the front end, and now the back end is really convoluted because you're only doing what the front end asks for instead of doing what makes more sense for the architecture and the code of the back end. But I think overall that might be okay. As long as you kind of have like a fine balance. Like, yeah, you can ask the backend team for these endpoints, but they might come back and say, well, we also need to do this. It's going to change a bit slightly, but all those other things you asked for, we'll do that as well. Yeah. You ran into a data limit with Connects? That's interesting. I've never ran into that. I mean, I've never worked with like huge query responses with Connects. I mean, I've worked with big ones, but not huge ones. Interesting. Yeah, and that's another aspect is you could follow a specification. So JSON server is technically following the JSON server specification, which says that for a given entity, it'll have the name. A GET request on that entity is going to list everything. A GET request with an ID param will list one, etc. That's an actual specification. And if they follow that, then the front end knows exactly what's going to happen. The other aspect is OpenAPI, which is what Swagger uses, is before they write any code, they could define the specification that says these are the routes that are going to exist, and these are the arguments that they take in, and here's request examples and response examples, and if you follow this, once our API is implemented, you'll be able to get up and go. And I think there's a tool out there where you can actually give it an OpenAPI spec, and it'll just create a mock API from that specification. So that's another aspect, is if they create that, now your front end could use like the mocked version until the real thing exists. Yeah. All right, now I'm 4 minutes behind on chat. I gotta catch up. Cowboying it, going rogue, yeah. Slifer is saying, my work is 100% back-end, but in my spare time I do a lot of front-end. Yeah. That's a great way to take all the responsibility with no pay increase. That's what I was mentioning earlier. If you are like, oh, I'll just do it myself, that's exactly the situation you'll run into. Like, your bosses will be like, oh, they're doing all this work and I didn't even have to give them a raise. I didn't even have to hire anybody new. And they will potentially take advantage of it. Now, in a nice, constructive work environment, and if you have a good boss, they'd recognize that you're doing a lot more work and give you a raise, but you can't guarantee it. At the end of the day, it's a business, right? And if they're getting more output for less pay, they're from a bottom line perspective, they're going to prefer that. Yeah. What I think about monorepos for medium-sized applications. I think monorepos are great for any apps that have separate things that potentially depend on each other. So it could even be a small app, but you have like a models library that you want your backend and your front end to use a monorepo. I've never used forward ref. I don't know about that. Yeah, and that's another aspect, like in terms of process and workflow. So like if you are doing Agile and you're using some sort of Scrum board or Kanban board, when you work on certain tickets as a team, you should discuss like what is dependent on what. So if as a front end dev, you're waiting on the back end, you should make it very clear that that ticket is dependent on the back end ticket. If they're in separate tickets, I know some teams will put all of it in a single ticket and then have like subtasks, but you need to make it apparent to the non-technical people that you can't do your work without their work. And also, you should probably have a blocked column on your board. So if it is separate tickets and yours is dependent on the backend work, you can move your ticket into the block column so that they know that their work is blocking your work. Their unfinished work is blocking your work. Slifer is saying, I work for a large company, and when we're designing an API, we write it down in an open API spec, submit it to the architects for approval, and then we start developing. I think it's a great process because the front-end devs can now take that spec and build the front end as if those endpoints actually did exist already. So yeah. How would you deal with 100 megabytes of local data in React Native? I've never done that. I don't know. I feel like there's certain APIs you can use, like file storage APIs, to read it and write it. Yeah. Mr. Almulk is saying, in my company, we have a proprietary self-created full-stack framework. We define everything in XML. It's heavily data-driven. We define client-side memory data and endpoints in the same XML file. It's a hot mess, but dev time is pretty low. Interesting. It's very interesting. 1,100 episodes? Oh, that's what we had the connects issue? Yeah. Yeah. I have not tried SolidJS. I think that's another one of those more opinionated things, right? Opinionated frameworks. A monorepo is a repo that has multiple separate projects in it. So like if you look at some of the coding garden projects, a lot of times I have a separate repo for the front end and the back end. Let's see if I can find an easy example. I feel like it's been a while since I wrote back end code, so it might be hard. But entropy chat actually is an example of a monorepo. I don't think I'm using any monorepo tools, but it is an example of one. And is Vox on here? Yeah, okay. This code actually isn't used right now, so you can ignore this, but no, it's not that one. Is it just entropy chat? Does anyone know where the code is for entropy chat? Oh, I guess it is here. Yeah, I guess it is here. So this is an example of a monorepo because we have the backend API server in here in a folder. We have the Vue.js client application in a folder. We have the marketing landing page in a folder. And then shared assets like images and stuff like that in our folder. So this is like a very rudimentary monorepo, and that I don't have a separate Git repo for each one of these things that are somewhat I mean, they're related in that they're the same project, but the code is not shared between them. But it's all in here, so that's like a monorepo. But in a better example, you would use something like Lerna, which lets you share dependencies of all of those folders within that monorepo. So you can have a monorepo where you have your backend project, your front end project, and then you could pull out shared code. So a lot of times if you're using TypeScript on the front end and back end, you might want to share your interfaces. So you could create another folder that houses all of your interfaces and maybe any shared code that can be run either on the front end or back end. So that's a separate folder. And then something like Lerna would let you link them. So the front end could link to that interfaces folder, and the back end could link to that interfaces folder. And if you make any changes to the interfaces, both the front end and back end are going to see the latest changes because they're linked to that folder. And so Lerna has all the tools to help you do that. So you can link them, you can bootstrap it, you can also share dependencies in a single file, and there are other ways to do it as well. But at the end of the day, it is all one Git repo, so that's why it's called a monorepo. And I've never heard of turbo repo, but it's probably another way to do it. All right, I'm still 4 minutes behind on chat. Just because Ryan can. I've had a really hard time trying to pronounce your name. It's just because Ryan can. For us, we have epics for huge tasks that link to smaller tasks. Yeah, and so it can be tricky depending on what project management software you're using, because then you may not be able to say that like this task is blocked by this task. I don't know, maybe you can, but makes it trickier because they're not broken down to really show that this thing is blocked by this other thing. Yeah. Yeah, and it is tricky because if you're doing all of that design work up front, then you're not necessarily being very agile, depending on how much design work you do. You could design it like piece by piece, little pieces. And then that is more agile because you're shipping complete features instead of trying to design the whole thing. Yeah. Question from Ma. And chat, you can help out with this because this is about like real world experience. They're saying, I have a question going from CS, computer science in university, to actually working. Do you feel like you can just concentrate on code? And our deadlines and responsibility stressing? I'll say, at least in my experience, so I have a computer science degree, the real world moves a lot slower. It'll vary depending on what kind of company you go to, but at least in my case, the real world moved a lot slower. Of course, there are still deadlines and there still are responsibilities, but compared to college, I really didn't have to juggle as much. So it was a bit easier to get used to and do. And do I feel like I can just concentrate on code? It depends. In the real world, also it depends on the job you go into, but in the real world, your job is probably like 40% code and then 60% planning and talking to people and collaborating. So the time that you do code, at least in my case, I could concentrate because I'm not doing it all the time. So yeah, that's my experience. Anyone else in the chat, feel free to chime in. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the other aspect is like, yeah, in school, you're doing a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily relevant or that you're necessarily going to use. But in the real world, you are doing things to make money for a company. So they matter in that aspect. And you're not necessarily doing extra or wasted stuff. That said, sometimes you are. Like sometimes the company isn't run very well, or there's bad management or bad planning, and you are doing things that are a waste or don't feel like a good use of your time. But I'll say it happens less on average, but it also depends on the company and the people that you work with. Can I do a simple backend API DB setup tutorial sometime soon? Maybe. I have a bunch of YouTube videos. For those of you just joining us and finding us today, you can check out my YouTube. It's got my stream archives. I mean, though probably the past 3 or 4 months of streams are not on there, but I do have a lot of backend and database setup stuff on there. Yeah. Morning tea. Yeah, we used to do that. Interesting. Okay, I'm way behind on chat. I need to catch up and then I'll answer one more question. A multi-module project. Gotcha. Yes, exactly. Sometimes I talk too much. Why is Angular dying? I don't know if it is dying. Say hello in 15 minutes when you cover the show. What's up, Pablo? Thank you for the hello. Yeah. Are we talking about like in the real world? Like one of the things that you might have to deal with is disrespect, misunderstanding. Yeah. I mean, that's why I mentioned like the real world is like 60% talking to people and communication. Like, coding is just one thing. You still have to be a good human, and you still have to interact with other people to get stuff done. So yeah. School is a place to learn, not to learn what you learn. I like that in FG. So what they're saying is you should learn how to learn, the tools for learning. Like, how do you study? How do you record information? How do you call back information? And C# Fritz, thank you for the raid. Welcome in, raiders. You have to tell me if you're experiencing a pre-roll ad. Well, I guess you can't tell. You won't be able to tell me until the ad is over. but welcome in. You've arrived at the coding garden. We write code here, and today specifically we're answering questions. I'm on the way out. I'm only going to answer one more question after this one, but the current question is, what do you do as a front end dev if the back end lacks behind? And we've talked about a lot of stuff. So we talked about, well, first you could create an API spec, and the back end could implement to that spec, so that way the front end knows what to expect. The front end could mock out the back end. We talked about team communication. Potentially as a front end dev, you could go sit with the back end dev team and learn a bit more. So eventually maybe you could be a back end dev or do back end dev work. We also talked about things you probably shouldn't do. You shouldn't just go write it yourself, because overall you're going to end up with more responsibility and like a mad coworker. We talked about a bunch of stuff, but yeah, it's fun. And it looks like C# Fritz was working on mobile dev with Blazor and .NET MAUI. I heard about .NET MAUI a long time ago, but is this basically what lets you write cross-platform apps? What is .NET MAUI? Yeah, apps that can run on Android, iOS, Mac OS, and Windows from a single shared code base. Nice. Is this like the successor to Xamarin? Very cool. Yeah, but welcome in, friends. Thanks for being here. Grab your whip and motivate the back end? No. We talked about, like, it has to be constructive. Like, at the end of the day, you can't just do it all yourself. You can't cowboy it or go rogue, because if you really want to have a productive team, you need to work on your team dynamics and, like, why are we having this issue in the first place, as in, like, things are getting done out of order or they're taking too long, that kind of thing. Oh, thank you, UXWeb, and thank you for being here. Thanks again for that raid. Yeah. Have I done anything related to Advent of Code? I only did the first 2 days of problems. But I don't really plan to do the rest. I'm going on vacation, and I'm gonna try not to code at all for like the next week and a half. So I probably won't. Yeah. Okay. Some of you didn't see ads. That's good. That's good. Yeah. And Just Squawk is saying, can you speak to how your planning process is when starting on a new project work? I'm a front-end dev. So I work at a software consultancy. So it's a very specific process, because we'll get clients coming in asking for us to build software. And then we have to tell them potentially how much it's going to cost. Is it even feasible? And then after a bit of back and forth, okay, this is what we can build for you given your budget. That kind of thing. But we typically do like a design and planning process where we go to the client, we ask them what they want, and then we try to come up with user stories, which is an agile concept of all the different things that they want this app to do. and we'll another. So we use Agile. The short answer is we use Agile. That's how we plan. But we'll have epic stories. So epic stories are like larger features that can be broken down into smaller stories. So we'll have all those epics. We'll break them down to a certain extent, but only enough to like estimate and give them a rough order of magnitude of how much that thing is going to cost. And then once we've broken it down, we prioritize it with the client. So we say, all right, these are all the stuff we're going to build. What's the most important to you? And then also from a technical perspective, we'll say, okay, that's important, but this, which is less important, actually needs to be done first in order for that thing to even exist. So we'll organize it, and then we'll start going. And we do 2-week sprints. So we'll say over these next 2 weeks, we're going to commit to these X number of stories. We'll work through it. After those 2 weeks are over, we'll do a demo and show what we built. And then we'll get some feedback on it, and then we'll go into the next sprint, and we just keep on going until all the stories are done, or the client can't pay anymore. So that's how we plan. But look into Agile if you're interested in that kind of thing. Oh yeah, there's supports that I haven't been saying. A ton. Chewy Dinosaur, thank you for that Prime 2 hours ago. Blank with the 10 months. Murdoch with the 20 months. Oh no, I did get to that one. Alistar with the Prime. Nookie Poo with the 50 bits. Sledge Dog with the 19 months. Zitto with the sub. Super Seno with the sub. Thank you again, C# Fritz, for the raid. And Namaste Geek with the 6-month resub. It says, ditto the appreciation and enjoyment of these Q&A streams. Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you. Scoots says, have an awesome vacay. Yeah. I love generating estimates as you twist my wrist. Yeah, like it's not always easy. Like especially as a developer, I'm like, okay, so we give an initial estimate for free. Like we don't charge the client anything because we need to actually get their business so that they will pay. So it's a fine balance between like how much work do I want as a dev and also as our product team. How much work do we want to put in to estimate this thing before a client has even paid? Because they may not even be able to pay for the thing that we're estimating. So it's a fine balance because you're doing a lot of high level estimates, and usually overestimating a little bit to cover yourself, so that you can go to the client and say, this is approximately how much we think it's going to cost or how much effort it's going to take, so that they can agree to it. And then we can start work and actually start getting paid. And then we might we will dive into it deeper and get more details and have a more finer grained estimate, which usually lines up with our rough estimate. When they don't line up, that's when we either lose money or make a lot of money. So yeah. Cool. Does my class have free space? I'm not running any classes right now. I think eventually I want to. So we usually, for like the initial estimates that we do, we don't build them. So, and we're usually not putting more than an hour or so into our proposal and our estimate. But a lot of times what we do is we say, okay, this is our estimate, but 20% or 30% of that estimate is the initial design and planning. So we're actually going to take this high level rough estimate and we're going to spend a month or 2 months coming up with more finer, we're coming up with detailed user stories, interviewing you to figure out, or you, the client, to figure out how do you actually use the app and what do you want from the app, and figuring out stuff like that. Also, like hiring a designer to a user experience designer to come up with the UIs and the flows and all of the stuff that would be needed to actually implement the app. And so that's what they pay for. And usually we put that into the estimate. They're like, yes, this is a rough estimate, but for the actual project, we're going to do a lot more detailed version that's going to actually cost money, and we're going to bill you hourly for that. What's my preference? Functional programming or OOP? I like a mix between the two, leaning more towards OOP. Okay, I'm behind on chat. I gotta get going. But yeah, all stories are never done. There's always stories that don't get completed, but either they don't have the budget for, or they got deprioritized, that kind of thing. But you basically get to a point where there are enough features implemented that this thing should be in production and people should actually be using it, that kind of thing. Yeah, I don't have any tips on monitoring or logging. Does anyone ever try to twist your mustache? No. So I live in Denver, Colorado, and I will say people are chill, but like nobody stares at my mustache. I mean, these days I wear a mask anyways, but nobody really asks about my mustache. But I've lived other places. Like I lived in Seattle for 3 months, and everybody would comment on my mustache. They wouldn't try to touch it, but they'd comment on it. And I lived in New York for like 3 months, and everybody would comment on my mustache. Yeah, so it's weird. Here, it's fine. Nobody cares about my mustache, which I like. Yeah. Scope creep equals money. Yeah, and that's like, if this is getting into like running a consultancy and like trying to build software for clients, like what we try to do is we come up with all of this estimate, and then we just come up with an hourly billing rate. So we say, this is a rough idea of how many hours this project is going to take. Put our hourly rate onto that, and you get a cost for the total project with some wiggle room, right? Like it may cost less, it may cost a little bit more, but in the contract we have them sign, we also say if it goes over the amount of hours that that you've initially decided, you're going to keep paying for that hourly rate. So that's the ideal scenario, because like we're being honest, and we're going to do our best to deliver within the given number of hours to meet their budget. But if we don't, it likely might be due to scope creep or like non-technically feasible things or things that we didn't anticipate. And the client hopefully will still pay for that because it's taking longer and requiring more effort. That's the ideal scenario. We might also do a fixed cost contract, and that's the scenario where you can either make a lot of money or lose a lot of money, because you'll sign the contract saying this software we're going to build is going to cost X dollars. And the client is going to pay that. They'll probably like pay in installments or something like that. But if we can't get it built for that, the client doesn't pay anything more. Like we've already agreed to this specific price. So we're now losing money because we have to pay devs and designers and project managers to actually finish the project. So in the ideal world, we do it hourly, but yeah. Average estimate 50. So we're a small consultancy. I think it's usually not worth our time if it is under 100,000. We do take some projects that are a little bit under, but usually it just doesn't work out if it's under that. So more than that. Software dev IRL. Why did I click that? I trust you, right? I trust you. Yes. Okay. This is a good one. And then I am going to declare chat bankruptcy, answer one last question, and then I gotta go. Shout out to our friend Clarkio. He coined the term chat bankruptcy. At least that's where I heard it. But basically, all those chats that I missed went bankrupt. But this is a very relevant comic. How the customer explained it. So this is how they explained it. How the project leader understood it. How the engineer designed it. How the programmer wrote it. How the sales executive described it. How the project was documented. No documentation. What operations were installed. How the customer was billed. Yeah, for like a roller coaster. You know. How the help desk supported it. What the customer really needed. It's so true. Like it's really hard. Like people think they know what they want. Like they think they know what software they want. But the more you dig into it, the more you realize that, oh, you maybe don't want that. You actually need this. And then, yeah, this is like a whole issue with some companies where the sales team is they're going to sell and potentially make the client think they're getting more than they're actually getting. I don't know. We've mostly solved that issue at my company. All right. Thank you for your question, Veritas. All right, I'm going to potentially do a speed run just to see if there's any that I can answer really quickly, and then I will go. Any advice for someone who is about to start working at a software consultancy as a second job after working on a small team? No. My advice is I think you'll like it because I did the same thing. Like I switched from, well, I had a teaching job in between. But before that, I was just writing software at a large company. And then now I'm at a consultancy, so I get to work on new stuff fairly often. So that's the nice thing about being at a consultancy is the projects change because you get new clients and then you don't have to keep working on the same thing all the time. So no advice, just enjoy it while you can. That's my advice. I was asking any plans on trying Blazor. I don't have any right now, and I'm very swamped right now. But I think eventually I should. So ASP.NET Blazor is a way of building backend apps or server rendered apps with C#. And then also it can generate client-side apps, like it generates WASM? WebAssembly? So it can generate like highly performant web front ends, and you're writing like C# code and template code. So I don't have any plans to try it right now. I will say go check out C# Fritz because I know he uses it quite often. So yeah, check him out. I don't have any plans for that right now. Do I have a GitHub example of how to bounce emotes around the screen? Sort of. You can look at the drop game. So this is the Christmas drop game. But we do have the non-Christmas drop game. Actually, the Christmas drop game will show you. But the Christmas drop game is a little more complex because it has... you'll see when those two, if they hit each... They didn't hit each other. But if they hit each other, they'll bounce off of each other, which is more work than just doing collision detection with the edges of the screen. Let's see. Yeah, this one's really complex. So you can look at this one if you want to, but the collision detection is fairly complex because of the collision with each other. If you're not worrying about the things colliding with each other, it's a lot simpler. Let's see. Okay, so we have a drop. A drop has the left edge, the right edge, the top, the bottom, and the center. The thing drops, and it drops in a random X location, so that's along this axis, so it's going to drop in a random place here, and then it's negative 200Y, so it's going to drop above the screen before you can see it, so it's a random. And then it also has a random X velocity, so X velocity is how many units it's moving in the X direction on each tick. Same thing for Y, so how many... This is X, and then Y, how many units it's moving down on each tick. Oh, there we go. There was a collision. And then... Oh, wait, does this one... This one does do collision with each other. Oh, well, basically, it ticks. And so it has a position and a velocity, and it keeps moving on the screen. And on every tick, you check to see, is it... hitting the side or is it off the side? And if it is, you reverse its velocity in that direction. That's pretty much it, but you can see it here. All right, last one from Limeotes. Any new tips for motivation or getting back into coding after dealing with burnout? I took a long break from a side project, coding, and I'm struggling to get back into it. I don't have any tips. I mean, this is a bad way to end the stream. I don't have any tips. I'm burnt out right now. I'm tired right now. I need a vacation. I need a long vacation. At least for me, when I have taken a break in the past, I kind of just I didn't even think twice about it. I just got back into it. I think the main thing is just making time for it. Just like you have to make time for other things in your life, like exercise or eating or watching Netflix. Put it in your schedule. But the other thing I think also is you have to rekindle your love for it, right? Like remember why you did that kind of stuff in your spare time to begin with. So find a good project to work on that reminds you of that, I think. I don't know, that's the best advice I can give right now. But yeah, Limeotes is saying if it makes you feel better, long vacations haven't worked for me recently. That doesn't make me feel better. But I'm gonna try. Eventually I am gonna take a long vacation. Okay, thank you everyone for your questions. This was super fun. I appreciate all the conversation. It's nice to see you too, Chris Griffin. Thank you for the raid from C Sharp Fritz. Thank you for all the supports today. I appreciate it. Appreciate you. All right, let's go on a raid. Ask a last. Hurry, Chris. You gotta hurry. Ask a last minute. If you're gonna do it, do it. And if it takes me longer than a minute to answer, I'll send you the bill. No, I'm just kidding. Ask me. But here are our raid messages. If you're a sub, you can use this raid message. If you're not a sub, you can use this raid message. You also can come up with your own raid message. Okay, I can answer this one, Chris, quickly. So Chris Griffin is saying, is it possible to have real-time events in a serverless backend? It's possible, but difficult, because the whole idea of a serverless backend is that it will spin up as needed. And if there's a real-time connection, that means it's persistent, which means it's needed all the time, which defeats the purpose of being serverless. However, if you look into, like, there's a way of doing it specifically with AWS Lambda. They have a service you can use. It's probably just like, if I could imagine how it works, is you still have your serverless functions, but there's one main like load balancer thingy that keeps the persistent connection. Yeah, so Amazon API Gateway has a way of dealing with it. So that's basically what you'd have to look into, whatever service you're using. Yeah, so using API Gateway with their specific WebSocketing, that's all I know of. Yeah, and thank you, Fernanda, for the Prime sub. Or F. Hernanda? Much appreciated. Oh yeah, but if you F Pila with the Pia with the five gifted, much appreciated. We're on the way out, but I appreciate all the supports and gifts. I will say, if you're following, you can use this emote. Yeah. Just reminded me, I used to watch it. Oh, nice. Yeah, check out my YouTube if you're interested in that kind of thing. Okay. I can't answer your question here, Ability, but if you check out the Discord, there's plenty of people there that'd be more than happy to help you out. Okay, let's go on a raid. I appreciate you all. Thanks for hanging out. No stream next Friday, because it's the holidays. I will try to have a stream the following Friday. What day is that? Oh, that's New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve stream? Maybe? Maybe not? I don't know. Just keep an eye on Twitter and the Discord. I'll let you know when I'm going to be live again. But potentially expect 2 weeks without Coding Guard. All right. You all are great. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful weekend. Like I said, we're going to do a raid wherever we go. Show them lots of love. Drop a follow if you like what they're doing. And wherever you are in the world, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or night. And until next time, here's this. All right, we're gonna go raid our friend Ortopilot. He is one of the best musicians on Twitch. He creates live loops and does covers and also has originals. He's great. So get your emotes ready and enjoy your time over there.